Hello, everyone. Welcome to Book Club Date. That is my wife, Katy.
And that's my husband, Josh.
We welcome you to our final episode of Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This is our episode 4, and this is part 4 of 4. So if you are back, welcome back. If you're new, maybe go to a previous video. But hey, we're cool having you, whatever.
Yeah.
It's cool.
If you just want
Whatever.
to check out the end of the book.
Yeah, that's fine too. If you're just like, you know what, I need to know what happens. That way I can read it. That's cool too. No judgment here.
Then.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you've been following along with us, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, Katy, before we dive into the final discussion of Lessons in Chemistry,
Yeah.
what else have you been reading?
I'm reading the same series, the Sweet Tea Witch series.
You're liking the series? You're enjoying it?
And it's a long one, so.
Yeah. Do you think you'll do like a monster review on it?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I don't know about that.
Oh, yeah. Some books you're like, I could talk about this for hours, and other books you're like, it's just entertainment.
Well, and some you like to, for me, some I like to just keep for fun, where I'm not like analyzing.
Right. Right. I
just read
100%
and enjoy.
get that. That's kind of how I feel about the book that I just finished, sort of Kagan. I really enjoyed it. I think there's a lot to discuss there, but I also just really enjoyed reading it and just having my own personal reading time with it, right? That way you don't, because you don't want to have to analyze everything 24/7, right?
No, that's like school.
Yeah, like that kind of wears you down. Sometimes you just like, there's like studying reading, and then there's like entertainment reading.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need to just read for the entertainment of it. And for the story to be told to you, and that's totally cool. But anyway, so I finished sort of Kagan.
Nice.
We both finished Lessons in Chemistry, which we're about to talk about.
We did.
And I am now reading Mind Burn, which is this really interesting sci-fi, a little bit in the future. It's like this cyberpunk meets 1984. George Orwell type feel, where there's like this one world corporation that's now like the main world government.
Oh.
But like everyone seems happy. But there's part of me that's also kind of like reading it.
Are they really?
Well, there's part of me, I don't want to get into spoilers with it, but like there is a part of me that just makes me like I'm about maybe 25-30% through, and I'm kind of like there's been a few hints so far that make me suspicious of foundational elements to this world. And I guess I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to spoil it in case anyone is just kind of listening. But it's really cool. It's cool characters. It's like this noir-esque kind of feel, a little bit of Blade Runner-ish. So that sounds of interest to you. Maybe check it out. Mind Burn. Kind of neat. That one I am kind of reading for entertainment as well. But you never know. Sometimes you just read a book. You're like, I need to talk about this with someone. So, and the internet is always there to just listen and tell you how wrong you are. But hey. Okay. Moving forward, that's what we've been reading. We're not going to do synopsis because we've done that for the past 3 episodes, and this is part 4 of 4. So if you don't know the synopsis of this book by now, I'm not sure what to tell you. So.
The synopsis is the same.
Yeah. But Katy, give the people their warning.
Oh, this is your spoiler and speculation warning. This episode is going to be our last one for this book, and so we will be discussing the ending and different things that happen, and then our next episode will follow our next book, which will be revealed later in this episode, so stay tuned.
How exciting.
I know, in case you want to read along with that one.
It's supposed to be a real page turner based on the accolades that I've read.
Nice.
So I am excited.
Yeah.
Very excited.
So that revelation is coming up.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just give a quick little recap of the previous readings. 2 very gifted chemists, Elizabeth and Calvin, develop a romantic relationship. Calvin, unfortunately, dies in a tragic accident while jogging before his death. He and Elizabeth did become pregnant, unbeknownst to Elizabeth, but hey, she found out one way or the other, right? Yep. Due to the social taboo of being pregnant at the time, Elizabeth is fired from her job at the research facility she and Calvin both worked at, which was Hastings Research. She gets by on consulting with her former coworkers because, frankly, they're just not as smart as her. So she basically takes cash from them, and she takes no credit, but gives them advice on how to proceed in their research. She does have her daughter, Mad, a.k.a. Madeline, but her legal name is Mad Zott. When Madeline's around the age of 4, Elizabeth meets a TV producer named Walter Pine, who asks her to host a cooking show. Elizabeth's show is non-traditional, but it leans into chemistry, and it's a hit, and immediately attracts a fan base, primarily women, because it's very empowering for them. Elizabeth expects a lot of women, and she doesn't like excuses, and there's something about her that she develops a very rabid fan base. During a Q&A segment, on an episode, Elizabeth comes out as an atheist, and that is where our reading stopped last week.
Yeah. So we pick up in chapter 33 with the fallout of Elizabeth's revelation that she's an atheist. And it doesn't go super beyond sponsors threatening to leave and some disgruntled phone calls, at least at first. But we do see some backlash a little bit later. Meanwhile, Madeline, her daughter is still meeting with the Reverend Walter, who was Calvin, her father's pen pal. And Walter states that he called the boys' home where Calvin allegedly grew up after his adoptive parents passed away and his aunt passed away. And so Walter calls as a reverend to try and get some information and confirm that that's the home where Calvin had been, and he has no luck. They keep refusing to speak with him, basically. And Mad makes a funny comment because he's like, why would they lie? And she's like, everyone lies. So Walter decides in chapter 34 to try the boys' home again, but this time he pretends to be a British philanthropist with the authority to donate $50,000 to the All Saints Boys' Home, where they suspect Calvin Evans lived at. But he just needs to confirm that that's where Calvin had been. And so that's what finally encourages the bishop not only to talk to Walter, but also confirms that that is where Calvin had been. We also learn that years earlier, the bishop had lied to a previous donor known as the Parker Foundation, and they had also been interested, the benefactor behind the Parker Foundation had wanted to adopt Calvin when he was a boy. And the bishop, interestingly, told the foundation that Calvin had died of pneumonia, even though he was still alive, and basically a pain to the bishop. The bishop did not like Calvin. But still, he decided to lie and say that Calvin had passed away. So the foundation sets up a memorial fund, specifically to provide funds for science textbooks and athletic gear. So Walter gives this information to Madeline with a P.O. box for the Parker Foundation. And he warns her that with rich people with these foundations, they often use a P.O. box and no direct name tied to it, so it may be difficult to get in touch with anyone.
Does not deter her, though.
No, it doesn't. So if Calvin was alive still, how do you think he would have responded to that information?
Well, as we know, Calvin Evans holds a grudge.
He does.
Or he did. I think he would, I would say pre-Elizabeth, he would hire a lawyer and just eviscerate that orphanage from a legality standpoint. I think he would 100% do that. I think post-Elizabeth, he would probably, if he was still alive, he would still be very mad. Who wouldn't be?
Yeah.
But I think he might have a little bit more patience with it all. You can also go down the rabbit hole. If he's alive, then Madeline knows her dad, and she has no reason to dig into the orphanage. But she's also Elizabeth and Calvin's daughter, who's inquisitive, so she might dive into it anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So I think he would
Well,
be.
it all started
mad.
with her family tree project, and so if I don't know, if they didn't want to discuss that kind of thing with her, she might have done her research on her own anyway.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because you can get curious about that stuff. Who doesn't like to know where they came from, or at least in terms of their family background.
Mm-hmm.
Some people don't care, I assume. But
Yeah.
it is interesting. Okay, so that's what happens there, and then moving onward in our story, it's kind of funny. Elizabeth recommends rowing on her show during one of her Q&A segments again, and this scene made me chuckle. All the women across America decide, I want to row. So she sees this firsthand by going to her boathouse where she rows.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Mason, who is kind of her, I would say, BFF rowing buddy, is basically trying to deal with the influx and trying to get people registered and fill out paperwork and everything.
Yeah. I mean, he even comments like he's tried to get his wife to come row for years.
Yeah, but one comment from Elizabeth Zott, and she's here, and then he points, and she's over in the corner doing stretches and squats and stuff, and she gives Elizabeth a thumbs up. Yeah. That part got me so good. She was like, "Oh, well,"
yeah.
Like, and Elizabeth's just like, "I'm sorry."
Yeah.
So that's a pretty fun kind of like that's some of the comedy in this book that just like.
The repercussions of things that she says or does that result in.
Yeah. Yeah, just like Elizabeth being so matter of fact in her discussions and dealings with the world results in some pretty funny escapades for sure.
Yeah.
But 6:30, moving forward here, 6:30, Elizabeth's dog, 6:30, notices what he calls a non-clapper on Elizabeth's show via the TV. So he ventures to the studio, goes all the way across town.
On his own.
On his own, because he's 6:30 and he's basically a genius for a dog.
Yeah, but he was also trained as like a bomb squad
dog,
detection dog. Yeah.
So he's really smart. But anyway, long story short, he ventures to the studio. He becomes a favorite on the show. But the whole time that he's on the show, and by on the show, I mean that he's on the show, he becomes effectively like a mascot for Elizabeth.
Yeah. He doesn't actively participate in the show. But he's there.
Yeah, and he's near Elizabeth, which is where he wants to be.
Yeah.
Because he's supposed to protect her. Because even his internal monologue, he feels guilty for Calvin dying because he feels like Calvin died on his watch. But anyway, so after a few episodes in the live audience, he finds the non-clapper, which is his whole point in being there. And wow, it's kind of a intense little moment, but he finds a bomb in her purse. He takes the purse, puts it on a table near a security guard. And basically the security guard finds the bomb. And the security guard gets interviewed, and he's being praised as a hero and stuff this whole time. And then he's just like, I didn't do anything. It was just here. And it's just really funny.
Yeah, no one knows.
Yeah. So 6:30 wants no credit, basically. He just kind of saves the day.
But we find out one of the reasons 6:30 did not continue as a bomb detection dog is because he was not inclined to go toward the bombs. Like, he would detect it, but he didn't want to throw himself on it.
That's legitimate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to throw myself on a bomb either.
No.
I would need to have a very good reason to do so.
Yeah, and he had not felt that, but he was so defensive of Elizabeth that he grabbed the purse and took it to the security guard.
And interesting, the same reporter from Calvin's funeral and from when 6:30 stopped the groundskeeper from killing him. It's the same reporter from both instances. Now the same reporter covering this bomb threat, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the incident that kind of rears later, that from Elizabeth basically saying that she was an atheist. This girl was very, I think she was like anti-communistic and very, very pro-religion, right? I think was she was on a watch list, wasn't she?
I think she was, yeah.
That's what
she was like an extreme.
Yeah. Extremist, basically.
Yeah.
But then moving onward, Zott does an interview with Life. I believe Harriet and Walter are just trying to coax her into doing it. They want her to do it. I mean, it's Life magazine back
They've
then.
gotten lots of requests
Yeah,
for
and Life is
articles
huge.
about her. So Harriet finally agrees to get her to do it.
And then, long story short, the reporter crosses a line he was told not to cross when interviewing Elizabeth Zott, and it's about asking about Calvin Evans. And then Elizabeth does something that's kind of surprising. She basically tells the unfiltered truth from her perspective.
Yeah.
Why do you think she did that? Because she's pretty closed in terms of Calvin and especially her personal life. And I think she knew she was going to have to open up to some degree.
Yeah.
But she was going to intentionally keep it more professional about her chemistry
She
background.
was. She was trying to keep it very focused on the chemistry and that she's a chemist. She wants to be seen as a chemist, not as a cooking show host.
Right. Why do you think she opened up so much, though?
I think she might have just been fed up. You know, there's been a lot of stories and speculation about her and their relationship, and I think she's just kind of like...
Fine. Here it is.
I think she's at her wit's end with it. I think she's just like, you want to know the truth? Here's the truth.
Yeah. Take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. All right. So what happens next?
So then the reporter is on his plane back to New York, and he's reflecting on everything that Elizabeth had told him. And he doesn't want to... He feels very protective of her because... I think partly because she was so open and honest with him. And I think he's seen how antagonistic people have been toward her, and he does not want to participate in that. So he has to figure out how to meet his requirements. And basically he does like a fluff piece to kind of tell about her but not tell on her. And we find out that the Life magazine featuring her article, featuring her, sells out. But we also find out that the editor did extensive edits. So in chapter 38, we see Zott is very angry about the write-up. She makes brownies on the show. I think it refers to her making brownies like 5 days in a row. Yeah. She comes home early. She finds Wakely, the Reverend, and Mad talking. And this is the first time that she's met him.
The Reverend.
Right. Yeah. Calvin's pen pal. So part of the negative Life article, they had interviewed her former coworkers, people who did not think well of Elizabeth, and they basically just included quotes from those people, not anyone who was her friend or who actually knew her well. Like they told some gossip from Mad's former teacher and just all kinds of people, like Donati, her former boss who stole her research. So you can see why she would be a little angry about that.
Yeah, she keeps trying and trying and...
Yeah, and then she makes brownies, which I've done that before too.
Brownies are delicious.
They are, yeah. So I used to do a lot of anger baking.
Anger baking? That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah,
That's
I
a fun
guess my
activity.
mom said, like, I can't remember what it was, but it was like if I was in a really good mood and felt like baking, it was cupcakes, and if I was in a bad mood, it was brownies, or maybe it was the opposite. I don't know.
Let us know in the comments
back in
if
high
you've
school,
ever
if you
anger
partake
baked.
in anger baking.
Yeah, if you partake in anger baking.
I mean, it's great. It's great stress relief. It really is. If you haven't tried it before, give it a try.
Anger baking.
Yeah, anger baking.
So is that like a real thing, or did you just come up with that?
I mean, I just came up with that, but
But it might be out there.
It might be out there. If not, there you go. That's my term for it.
I just love that. That's amazing. Yeah.
Anger baking. Give it a try. So, so the reporter is also upset that his article was basically um
Was
gouged. It was
Yeah.
gouged to do the exact opposite of what he wanted. So he actually writes up a new article and he sends it to Elizabeth. He quit at Life. He's trying to get this article published in a science magazine, but it's been rejected 10 times. So we find out that that's why Wakely is there. That's what he's bringing. He brings the new article and is like, you should read this.
Yeah, it's like a letter from the reporter and the actual article that the reporter is trying to publish. So the letter from the reporter is basically summarizing generally everything you just said, like, hey, sorry, Life published that article. I didn't want that to happen.
I'm not there anymore.
I'm not there anymore. I'm trying to get this one published. Thought you should see it. It's been rejected 10 times. And this actually makes Mad quite upset because she basically starts crying and says that her mom isn't working in a lab. Her mom isn't a chemist because of her. Mm-hmm. And it seems like it came out of left field, but then we get a flashback, which comes up here. Yeah. And the flashback is Madeline visiting Reverend Wakely in his office, and she actually runs into Elizabeth's old co-worker, Frask. And she is currently Wakely's typist. So Madeline, as always being inquisitive, is talking to Frask, finds out that there is a connection there between her mother and Frask, and
that Frask knew both of her parents?
Frask knew both of her parents, so that, of course, engages Mad even further. Mm-hmm. Frask attempts to tiptoe around the subject of Elizabeth and her dad at Hastings, but Mad pushes because, like her mom, she doesn't care. She wants the information. She wants to know. Mm-hmm. And then Frask eventually does explain. And keep in mind, Madeline is 4 years old. So Frask is trying to not...
She might be 5 at this point.
Yeah, but
still,
she's like...
She's young. She's young.
She's not even like a kid, basically. She's just out of toddler years, right? I mean, so like Frask is trying to spare Madeline of this, but Madeline keeps pushing, so she basically explains how, yes, your mother was fired because she was pregnant with you, Mad. And that does upset Madeline, which is why she was crying in the previous scene. But before leaving, she gives Frask a private envelope containing an unpublished article by the reporter from Life. Frask is supposed to give it to Wakely, but Frask, being the gossip that she is, because that's been established in previous chapters, she opens it and reads it. And actually, Frask is a huge fan at this point of Elizabeth Zott. She supports her. She gets it.
They've come to an understanding with each other. They've had similar experiences.
Correct.
That have bonded them, and she is furious about the Life article.
Yeah, because she knows it's just trash, basically.
And she knows the people that were interviewed.
Yes.
That's the people interviewed whose quotes were actually used.
Yes. And so she, after reading this updated report, this journalism piece by the reporter, that's much more friendly to Zott, it moves her to write to Life and tell her how wrong their article was. And she even says, kind of in like an internal monologue, it probably won't amount to anything and they're just going to throw it away.
Yeah.
And then the next line is, they published the letter.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. And this basically triggers a bunch of letters from women all over the country, sending in their letters to Life to defend and advocate for Elizabeth. And Harriet, she attempts to communicate this to Elizabeth, but Elizabeth at this point, because of the Life article and because Madeline is sad and it's just kind of snowballed on itself, Elizabeth is now dealing with depression, right? Like she's not feeling it anymore. I think there's a line that everyone has a breaking point.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth finally hit hers.
Yeah. I mean, she feels like everyone hates her. Like she's not a real chemist anymore.
Yeah, which is all she wants. Most people would be thrilled to be the next Julia Child. Yeah. Elizabeth just wants to be a chemist. It is so important to remember that.
She wants to do her research.
Yeah.
That's her jam.
Yeah, and she just Yeah, I mean, she's just heartbroken over it, right? Because she's gone
She
through
didn't
fire.
want Mad to read the article. She just, and she did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's just at a very low.
Yeah, and then so basically at this point, we're back to essentially the beginning of the book, kind of where it started.
Yeah.
And at this point, Harriet has an idea, and there's a fun little kind of.
And Harriet has read the intended article that the reporter had sent.
And Harriet reads magazines
all the
ravishly.
time.
So
all the time.
She is very much aware of what would play well in a magazine, or at least she has an intuition about it. So she starts pushing this article to other scientific
magazines.
To women's magazines. I'm sorry. Yeah, to women's magazines, because the reporter is only pushing to scientific magazines, and she's just like,
right. And the article is basically the importance of female scientists. So it primarily covers Elizabeth, but there's other female scientists included as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Elizabeth, we come into a scene where Elizabeth has a basically a impromptu confession / deep conversation with the Reverend Wakely. She tells him about his letters, how she's aware that he was a pen pal with Calvin.
That she read the letters.
Yeah, and that
read them.
She's not sorry that she read them.
Yeah.
Basically. And she also tells him about, a bit about her upbringing, specifically her brother's suicide. And then Wakely gives her some encouraging words that, she doesn't necessarily want out, but she wants back in. And I think what he meant by that was maybe I don't know what he meant by that. What do you think he meant by that? I don't know. Like, because I don't want to assume. Like, what do you think?
I mean, she wants back in control of her life. She wants back in the game. Her world has been so spun out of control, and for years now, she's been doing what she's had to just to get by, essentially. But she wants back into her research. She wants back into herself.
Yeah.
And I think we all hit points like that in our lives.
Right. Or maybe you're missing something, and maybe you even know what it is.
His encouragement there, like, you don't want out, you want back in, I think it can be interpreted several different ways, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, my first thought was like, well, yeah. I mean, like, she wants out of the cooking show, but really she wants back into chemistry.
Yeah.
But then I'm also like, well, he doesn't need to. Maybe she did know that, and perhaps he was just reminding her of that. It wasn't like he was presenting her some revelation. Maybe he was just reminding her that that's what, in fact, yes, that is what she wants. Because
I think sometimes when you're in the weeds, it's hard to recognize.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you're giving advice to a friend. It's like so easy.
Yeah.
And then like when you need advice, it's like.
And you're like, man, I should take my own advice sometime.
Yeah, and you never do, because you're you, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so all of this results in the article, her kind of rediscovering, or not rediscovering, but deciding to put, action to her words of, I'm going to actually pursue chemistry again. I'm going to attempt to get back into it. I'm going to try and find research and move on to that. And this results in her announcing that she's leaving Supper at 6, which is the title of her show, on air. And leading up to this, she discovers that Walter and Harriet are in love.
Adorable.
I kind of called it. I made a note where I was like, yeah, they're definitely gonna.
They're gonna be endgame.
Yeah, they're gonna end up together, Walter and Harriet. And then I love the little bit with Walter and Harriet, how she says something like, "Oh, what, you guys think that I just like wouldn't realize or whatever?" And they look at each other because things go over Elizabeth's head sometimes.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact line, but it was really funny.
Yeah.
It was enjoyable. But Elizabeth decides to leave supper at 6. Walter's behind her on the decision, even though,
he's not thrilled with it.
Yeah, but he respects Elizabeth.
He respects the decision.
Yeah, he respects her decision. And obviously, you can't force anyone to do something that they don't want to do.
But from his perspective, right, it's a very successful show in syndication nationwide.
Yes.
So they're making quite a bit off of that from sponsorships and the syndication.
Yeah. Yeah. So Elizabeth gives basically she gives an amazing monologue about how chemistry has changed, and she offers encouragement. She even cites an example from a previous viewer who she encouraged to pursue becoming a medical doctor or a medical professional.
A heart surgeon,
which is amazing. And she reads a letter from that individual, and it's very heartwarming. It's very sweet. Mm-hmm. That whole scene kind of gave you goosebumps.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it really did. But we kind of mentioned it earlier. Elizabeth, of course, she did not continue to pursue the show. However, would you have left the show if you were in her shoes? Go ahead and assume you don't have as a strong of a passion for chemistry as like Elizabeth.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think if my focus was more on, hey, this is a great platform where I can reach a lot of people and make a difference and encourage these women.
Mm-hmm.
And, if my focus is more on, so it's really like, where's your priority? If my priority is more like, I can do a lot of good with this platform, it's giving me an opportunity to speak my mind and reach a lot of women.
Right.
Then that would, I would say, encourage me to stay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But obviously Elizabeth's priority is her research and stuff. And the other thing is, they didn't explore, could you incorporate that a little more? Or would there be a way to do the show once a week? And that way she can primarily focus on her research.
Mm-hmm.
Because at this point, the production is 5 days a week. So
right.
That's obviously full time, but could you have come to some sort of agreement? I don't know. I mean, there's options, there's possibilities that weren't explored.
Right.
But for the sake of the story, I understand why that would just kind of.
Yeah, that would kind of put an unnecessary barrier.
Yeah, but I did think it was cute how she kind of ends the show and her whole audience is just still sitting there staring at her. They're just like,
yes.
And
then the one time she finally reads a cue card from Walter.
Yeah.
He writes class dismissed on a cue card and holds it up for her.
Yeah, and she actually follows through with that.
She goes, class dismissed. And then it's over.
Yeah.
Her show, her TV personality life is done.
Yeah.
But she got to leave on her own terms a lot of times.
She did.
TV media, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
So, but moving forward, so after she's left the show, Elizabeth decides to return a call to Frask.
Finally. But she's been trying to find a new job, and people are not these institutes and educational institutions are not quick to pick her up.
No, and part of
As
that
a chemist.
Part of that is Donati,
mm-hmm.
right? A respected professional who was her boss.
Yeah, who in the Life article was quoted as saying that she was not a very good scientist.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's...
After he stole her work.
Yeah. It's basically, obviously people only want her as Elizabeth Zott, the TV show host, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The cooking show host. They don't...
Not the chemist.
They don't want Elizabeth Zott, the chemist. And it's, it's mentioned that that's also demoralizing to her. But thankfully, things turn around fairly quick in the reading. So she finally returns a call to Frask. she finds out that Frask has actually been appointed head of personnel at Hastings. Basically, Frask is head of HR at Hastings. And she implores Elizabeth, you need to come in. You got to come in. She, for whatever reason, doesn't bother to explain it over the phone, probably because she just knows a conversation like that's going to be easier in person. Mm-hmm. So Elizabeth does go in. And Wilson, the man who Calvin mistook as his father at the orphanage, and Avery Parker of the Parker Foundation are there. And they all meet, Frask included, and Elizabeth inside Calvin's old lab. So what happens from there, hon? This is kind of like the conclusion.
So we find out that, first Donati comes in and is trying to lay it on thick to Wilson of the Parker Foundation, because basically Wilson is the face of the Parker Foundation.
Correct.
And Avery Parker, she is actually the Parker behind the Parker Foundation, but there was a rule that her husband needed to sign off on any donations and stuff. So Wilson was appointed because Avery wasn't married.
Right.
And what ends up happening is Donati is fired. He is out.
Yes.
They find out, it comes out basically that Donati had misappropriated the funds that had been donated for Elizabeth's research in abiogenesis, and that they had lied about Elizabeth being a man. They had lied about funding her research, and they just all of it. It all comes out, which is like, you're like, sweet revenge. Mm-hmm. And so Elizabeth is offered Donati's job, basically the head of chemistry.
Yeah, and let's see here, Elizabeth. As she's talking with Wilson and Avery Parker, she kind of convinces herself that all they want is Calvin's old research, because they mention something about old boxes or something like that. And Elizabeth, her Achilles heel is not having self-esteem in herself, which, given the world and how it's kind of beat her down as a woman, I understand. Mm-hmm. I understand that. But she basically convinces herself that Wilson and Avery, all they want is Calvin's old research, and that all of this is a ruse just to get it. So they'll make her the head of chemistry, but as soon as they get his research, they're just going to fire her. And then Avery, speaking with Elizabeth alone, she basically asks everyone to leave. And Avery Parker decides to speak with Elizabeth one-on-one. And she was going to do this later, but she decides to come out and say, I am Calvin's biological mother, and she wants to meet her granddaughter, Mad. Mm-hmm. But she also wanted to hire Elizabeth. That's why she was trying to keep these two things separate, because she didn't want Elizabeth to assume any one thing, that maybe she was only being hired because she's technically family now. But
right,
that's not. But Elizabeth, we know Elizabeth at this point. When she has a question, she's going to ask it, and she's not going to stand for.
She's not going to let it go.
Yeah. So, that kind of brings me to this question that I wrote down. Do you think that Elizabeth will ever, and Katie, you as a woman can probably answer this much better than I can, because you can relate to Elizabeth more. Do you think she'll ever develop, her internal self-worth to the point where she overcomes her self-doubt, in particular when it comes to Calvin? Because they were.
I think with the right support,
yeah,
she could.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if she's becoming respected, because she wants to be known as a scientist, as a chemist. That's her priority. That's how she wants the world to see her. So I think going forward, yeah, that's possible. But yeah. I think not instantly, right? It would take quite a bit of work still.
Yeah. Well, when your whole life you've been constantly doubted by everyone around you because of.
Right. But I think also, Avery would be a good influence on her, because she's kind of like, I am done having to ask for permission. I am done being,
right,
held back from what I want to do, what I want to say, what I want to support. Like, I'm done. So I think Avery could be a really good role model for Elizabeth.
Right. Someone who's kind of walked the path already.
Yeah, because we find out that Avery had been a single mom, and she had been basically, they had lied to her. So we find out that the letters that Calvin had from, was it like a sad mother or something like that?
Yeah.
That actually was Avery,
Yeah.
and it was true. She was basically, and it's actually like, I don't know if this kind of thing actually happened. If so, quite horrific. Basically, she was taken to a religious hospital, and if she didn't agree to put the baby up for adoption, she basically would get no assistance with the birth.
Yeah.
So they just kind of left her alone in a room to birth her child.
Calvin.
Yeah.
Which is just like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I don't care whether
awful.
you agree with it or not. No.
No, it's a
No.
person. It's a person going through a natural biological process, but it's a risky biological process,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not something you historically, that's why midwives exist. That's
Yeah.
why there's always a helping hand in the room, right? I mean,
Mhm.
most people wouldn't let their
Yeah. And then, like, she passes out and they take him, and then they lie to her and say that he died.
which is, she, I mean, in that very vulnerable headspace that she was in, she probably, and she attempted to just move on with her life.
Yeah.
Right. So,
because I think in the end you find out she basically buried Calvin like 3 times.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Because once when
they told her that
he had died in childbirth, again after they had found out about the boys' home, and she had sent Wilson there, and
that's where the bishop lied to Wilson about,
and said that Calvin had died of pneumonia.
Yep.
And then again when he actually
died. Yeah. So she literally never got to meet her son.
Yeah.
She was aware of him eventually, like 20 years probably after all the, like.
Yeah, and she wanted him. Like, she was.
Yeah. Yeah, but she didn't want to, when approaching, Calvin was not a child anymore. He was an adult, and she even says that. So she
didn't find out that he was still alive until an article came out about him. Maybe it was in Time as well, actually.
Yeah.
But an article came out about him and his research, and she was like, oh my God, and seeing him, he looked just like his dad, so she recognized him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Immediately cut off funds to the boys' home.
Good on her.
Yeah, since they had lied about it.
Or the bishop lied about it.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So,
So she was trying to carefully approach and support Calvin, but she never actually got to the point where she was able to meet him.
Right. So Avery comes out with all of this, all this information.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of spills it all out, everything that we just covered, or that Katy just talked about. And it's a very emotional scene. They both end up crying. It's just a whole lot to take in for both, and even as the reader, as like a passive audience member, right? And it's just,
oh my gosh. And when Elizabeth is like, you're the acorn, because in that horrible Time article, they had published Mad's family tree project, which she had like kind of filled out, and then like further back in her family history, she had included some historical female figures.
Right.
Because frankly, she didn't know. Like, there wasn't that information,
So, and then, that basically concludes the book. Elizabeth connects with Avery, and It ends with Elizabeth inviting Avery over for supper at 6 at her place. And she wants Avery to meet not just Mad, but Harriet and Walter and all the other characters that effectively Elizabeth has created her own family and support system. And it's a very feel-good ending. And this whole book, this novel, is just quite the journey.
Oh, yeah.
It's quite the journey. So, did you think that? Were you surprised by the ending, hon?
A little bit, not completely.
Yeah.
I did think that that Calvin's parents were alive and were going to connect. I did feel like they were the donor.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't realize the dad had passed away quite early as well.
right. I am kind of in line with you. I knew the big points that were going to be hit. I knew that the donor was going to be related somehow, some way
Yeah.
to Calvin, possibly Elizabeth. Right. I knew that all of that was going to be revealed at the end. But Bonnie Garmus did. It's. I can see why this book has done so well. It's become an Apple TV series.
Yeah.
Because it is just so well written. Two, it's at least from me, from like a man's perspective, I feel I know it's fictional. I get that. Calm down. But I do feel like I understand a bit more and empathize a bit more with the struggles that women go through professionally and all of that. So if that was the goal of the book, I would say accomplished. Very well done.
Yeah.
The characters.
And I think the
it's
time
lovely.
period helps
Yeah.
highlight some of those struggles
Yeah, because
a little more clearly than
it does.
it would be today.
It does, because today, if you were to talk about sexism in academia, does it exist? Yes, it does. But I would say it
Perhaps not as extreme. Perhaps the gap has shrunk.
The gap has shrunk significantly. As someone who worked at a university for a bit, it's, in terms of college admittance, it's more women now. So
interesting.
No, I don't think if the book was in modern times, it would have the same hit and the same chord striking ability.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's an issue. Feminism is an issue that needs to be worked on constantly.
Yeah.
I think everyone has a slightly different definition on what that means.
Right.
Which is kind of where the friction and some of the, not to get political or anything like that, but that's where some of the discourse comes from, right? But overall, I mean, I really enjoyed the book. I would recommend it to many people. Certain people who I just know, I just wouldn't recommend it to. But
yeah,
if they're open-minded, I mean, I would absolutely recommend it to them. Elizabeth Zott's a
definitely
great
enjoyable.
Character.
She's a very interesting character.
So.
I liked the way she tied some things together, and some of the characters, like some of the more minor characters, would like keep coming back in different ways.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
I thought that was good. Yeah,
I'm glad Donati got his.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Got what he deserved.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, he was such a butthead.
He really was. He was quite the jerk.
So, yeah. Overall, Katie, would you recommend the book?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, definitely worth a read.
All right. I know it's kind of hard to choose just one, but is there any particular spot that stood out to you more than the others during your reading? Any section of reading?
Not necessarily. I would say probably using the dog's perspective, the narration from the dog's perspective. That was definitely a unique choice. But I enjoyed it. Like I liked that.
Yeah, I did
too. Really cute.
I did too. So, yeah, let us know your thoughts on this book. We did it, guys. We read it. Yay. Hooray! All right. So let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and hit the like and subscribe button for future episodes. Let us know if you want us to review the Apple TV series by leaving a like, because we're going to watch it regardless because we have to, but we don't want to create a video if you guys have no intent in watching it. So let us know if you would like us to create kind of just like a review video or a compare and contrast video. between the Apple TV series and the book itself by hitting the like button. Let us know. But before we get to
or leave a comment.
Yeah. Just let us know. There are so many ways to let us know. Let us know. All right.
Let us know.
But before we get to our favorite highlights, let's reveal the next book for book club date.
That's my drum roll.
That's our drum roll, and it's The Wager, a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder by David Grann. From the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Killers of the Flower Moon, a page-turning story of shipwreck, survival, savagery, culminating in a court-martial that reveals a shocking truth. The parallel narrative reveals the deeper meaning of the events on The Wager, showing that it was not only the captain and crew who ended up on trial, but the very idea of empire. So, we are going to discuss this book over 2 episodes. It is not as long as Lessons in Chemistry. Our first episode will cover up to and including chapter 11. So chapters 1 through 11, that's about 125 pages. So we will see you back at the next reading if you want to join with us in reading this one. Yeah, I mean, you can just see all the accolades on the back there if you're watching and not listening. It's apparently very good in Killers of the Flower Moon.
Wasn't that a movie that recently came out?
It was a movie. Martin Scorsese directed it, but it was based off of David Grann's book. So this one I am excited to read. So now that we've revealed that, let's get into our favorite highlights. Katie, hit me with some highlights.
So some highlights, some quotes that we enjoyed. I think we both know Walter said through gritted teeth that God is just a bit different from Yahtzee. Agreed, Elizabeth said. Yahtzee is fun.
Just so many little lines like that just make you chuckle. They're really good. Let's see here. Another one here is, I'm sorry, Mason, truly. I never expected, really, he snapped. Because 2 weeks ago, one of my patients refused to push until you finished explaining the Maillard reaction. She looked up surprised, then reconsidered. Well, it is a complicated reaction.
And when 6:30 shows up to supper at 6 set. And there's the dog, nearly everyone said. Look, it's 6:30. He didn't understand why Elizabeth didn't like being a star. He loved it.
His internal monologue is just amazing.
It's so fun.
And by the way, I am so relieved nothing happened to 6:30. I'm happy he made it to the end.
The dog lives.
Oh, man, I would just...
The most important spoiler.
Yeah, like, if you have to share a spoiler with someone, that's okay to share with them because...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, generally, I need to know.
Oh, yeah, 100%. 100%. Let's see here. Amanda is very fond of you, Harriet, Walter said, quietly as his daughter ran back indoors. He managed to stop himself from adding, as am I. Ooh. And that's when I was like, ooh.
Like, oh, something's there. Oh, so Harriet is getting a divorce from her.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We didn't mention that.
Abusive husband.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Good for Harriet.
Yay, Harriet. Yeah.
Harriet Sloan will be.
She goes on to, like, she gets a job working with a magazine, right?
You know, I can't recall, actually. It wouldn't shock me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good for Harriet.
Yeah.
She's going to be Harriet. I don't know what her maiden name was. But
yeah.
I guess she'll be Harriet Pine.
Let's see. We've got one more. When women understand these basic concepts, they can begin to see the false limits that have been created for them. You mean by men? I mean by artificial cultural and religious policies that put men in the highly unnatural role of single-sex leadership. Even a basic understanding of chemistry reveals the danger of such a lopsided approach.
Elizabeth explaining why feminism makes sense. This is her, I believe, this is part of her kind of going away talk whenever she decides to leave the show and she's announcing it live. Chemistry is change, and change is the core of your belief system, which is good because that's what we need more of. People who refuse to accept the status quo, who aren't afraid to take on the unacceptable. But sometimes the unacceptable, your brother's suicide, Calvin's death, is in fact permanent, Elizabeth. Things happen. They just do. I apologize. That was when the Reverend Wakely was talking to Elizabeth. I'm sorry, I mistook that. So yeah, that's kind of I wouldn't say a pep talk that he's given her, but he's emphasizing to her that you got to move on, right? I mean, I would say he puts it in a more friendly way. Let's see here.
And then, this one is from her final episode, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. Courage is the root of change, and change is what we're chemically designed to do. So when you wake up tomorrow, make this pledge. No more holding yourself back. No more subscribing to other opinions of what you can and cannot achieve. And no more allowing anyone to pigeonhole you into useless categories of sex, race, economic status, and religion. Do not allow your talents to lie dormant, ladies. Design your own future. When you go home today, ask yourself what you will change, and then get started.
Okay, and that is the end of our highlights that we liked from this most recent reading, and that is the end of our book club for Lessons in Chemistry. We are going to move on, and our next book again is The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grann.
We're going to discuss the book, and remember, it'll be covered in 2 episodes. So our first episode will cover up to and including chapter 11, so chapters 1 through 11, and that's about 125 pages.
You can find our show Book Club Date on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and ideally anywhere you get your podcasts or listen. You can find us wherever. We're going to try to be everywhere. So,
and we'll have links to both Lessons in Chemistry and our next book, The Wager, in the description.
Correct. Alrighty. Have fun reading. And as always, that's my wife, Katie.
And that's my husband, Josh.
And this has been Book Club Date.